Both of today's readings seem to be telling us about a journey for healing, journey into healing. A few years ago because the presenter at the ministry conference was Bishop Jim. We had a ministry conference about how we remain being resourced for preaching. And the advice, generally speaking, the main pieces of advice, was that one should choose only one piece of scripture to preach on. So even though each week we have potentially three biblical readings and a psalm, it is recommended that only one scripture is needed. One of each thing, to choose one reading, from it to discern one message or theme, to link it to one church doctrine, to illustrate with one image and connect with one mission outcome. All fine and dandy. It seems a pretty straightforward formula, so from now on, that's what I'll do. Okay? Then I thought about it. Sure, following such methodology would be much simpler and straightforward, but you see, I had a problem with it. Because I keep waiting for the punchline when I'm listening to a sermon. The deeper wondering that opens me up a bit. The thing that bugged me, so kept wanting me to ask and search. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that methodology. But as I reflected, I thought I could do that. But it wouldn't be long before I was bored. I have to admit, it didn't also seem to me to ask much of those who were listening. But the advice and the suggestion is there, so even though there are two readings today and we had the psalm, two in particular, the two that we had that draw me and in which I think there are some common themes, my learnings of the week flash warnings in my mind. I might just note and ignore for this week anyway. Perhaps slightly sprinkled with a season of guilt for that learning I was meant to have taken that many years ago. One of the sensitivities I think about using just one text is that it preserves the integrity of that text within its context. What do I mean? Well, it's a little bit like assuming that John the Baptist was a Christian, or Jesus was a Christian, when as far as we know they both remained always a Jew. As Christians, we can make mischief with the Old Testament text and suggest their sole purpose is to point to the events of Jesus. I think the nearer actuality is that the New Testament writings, the events of Jesus proclaimed as Messiah, require the Old Testament text to make sense. So today I want to use and consider both of our texts, because under the detail of the story I think there are some common themes, common to being human and common with our human wrestle to accommodate the divine. So let's consider the story of Naaman. Pretty sure will be familiar to you. Thank you, John. Last minute asking to read a new text as you walked in the door. Thank goodness it was a familiar text. Naaman, despite being a man of fine stature, a figure of military might and power, he has leprosy. It's actually a general term used for any undefined skin disease, so probably leprosy as we know it. Other than debilitating your health, there's also a social stigma attached to some such thing. For all his power and his might and his influence, Naaman can do nothing about it. There's only 14 verses in that reading. They are very tight verses and the story is told. But nothing in this tale is as Naaman or the listener might expect. God speaks through a captured slave girl in servitude to Naaman's wife. God speaks through Elisha's servant and through Naaman's attendants. Each of these are people without power, little or no stature or status. Cure is effected quite independently of Naaman and all his capabilities, power, wealth and prestige. Hardest for Naaman is obedience, submitting to simple instruction, engaging in a humble process that is quite different to Naaman's stature. Sure, Naaman is healed of the body, but perhaps more pertinently, and perhaps a point of the story, Naaman the great and the powerful is healed and he is made whole when he submits in obedience to the command of the divine, the one who is beyond, that eludes Naaman's knowing and his control. This speaks to this human-divine intersect. Such drama might make us ponder a thing or two. If you or I seek healing and wholeness, do we harbour expectations of what that will look like when we seek it? Of where we will look for it and what we will find? Perhaps we imagine we make ourselves more likely to be healed if we undertake feats of courage, or purity, or holiness, or if we go to remote places and buy rare and ancient curatives, for we think our present resources are inadequate. God's active presence is known in the world, even as what we need for healing, as Naaman's story illustrates, may not be as we expect or imagine. The ordinary, overlooked things of every day are more than adequate to reveal God, who desires for us to know ourselves whole. Wholeness given us that can neither be bought nor earned. The way the story comes today, it seems there's something about obedience that's quite key here. But how might we understand that healing comes through obedience? It seems pretty plain and simple in Naaman's story, but in my experience it sure is never so plain and simple in real life. So I wondered on this. Being obedient is to act in accord with an instruction given in outward expression. But would we act if we didn't believe that by our action we would achieve the desired outcome? Naaman needed somehow to believe that by doing as Elisha's servant instructed and his servants urged, he would be healed. That the divine who spoke through them would heal him, and despite his resistance, it did. I wonder whether our age-wearied cynicism has tarnished our capacity for obedience defined in this way. Obedience, what I mean is to act, that believing the divine does act concretely in real time. That God outworks in real life, that something actually can happen. To hold to and trust this as true suggests a resolute and a resilient, not an unwavering or an undoubting, but a tenacious holding to the divine. That which we might name God is trustworthy. Despite much evidence to the contrary, trusting that we are known to and in God, that we matter. That this thing we name the divine may not be revealed as we expect, by whom we expect, in ways we might expect. But we are given and provided with what we need. As did Naaman, we may need the pragmatism of the odd companion or two to reveal to us what is right under our noses. To turn to the Gospel, the sending of the 70, a ripple forward of an Old Testament tradition where Moses gathered and empowered 70 to help lead and guide the journeying Israelite community. God's Spirit fell on those gathered in two sides of the camp. 70 is more than a random number, rather it implies sufficient are empowered and sent to be and to bring and to bear God's presence to the community. And yes, they are sent in twos. Company, of course, this task needs support and the encouragement of each other. It is not a task to be done alone. Ripple again of Old Testament tradition that adds depth and richness. The testimony to be valid, too, must bear witness. Did you notice that the 70 sent are commanded to go? They are not asked if they'd like to. Volunteers for the task are not recruited. These are told to go. This is not a sending of self-dependence. It's not a sending a pre-planned expectation. It's not a journey of self-aggrandizement. This is not about those sent. To an extent, it's not about what is achieved. It's about obedience, to being sent to do God's work, to trusting ourselves to the process. Trusting we are what the divine needs, that we are adequate, that our adequacy is sufficient, for it depends not on us but the one sending. We send as bearers of, take us through. We are necessary through what we bring, how we bring, how we are bearers of the divine. That message in scriptural terms, God's kingdom is near. How that is heard, how that is received, the transformation of people's hearts. Is that even in our hands? So yes, these are very different dramas from very different contexts, but it seems to me they speak something in common, something really difficult for those of us who profess and try to live a life of faith in an age of spiritual indifference. The tangible actuality that our life is dependent on God as much as that defies reasoned ability. We do receive all that we need to flourish, and together we are adequate for the task of revealing divine presence that is already in the world.